The mysterious city of Machu Picchu is no longer occupied. It has been empty for nearly half a millennium. Standing at the edge of those famous terraces, you begin to see within the stonework the outline of something larger, a doorway, perhaps, to something that was never meant to be opened. And what we are ultimately talking about is recovering the full power that Pachacutec possessed, not just understanding it, recovering it. There is something buried beneath Machu Picchu that was never supposed to be found, not by tourists, not by historians, not by anyone. For 500 years, it sat hidden under the terraces, under the temples, under the postcard views that millions photograph every year, and nobody had a clue, not a single hint. The world looked at those stone walls and thought it understood what it was seeing. It did not. Then, between 2023 and 2025, 3 separate teams of scientists using DNA extraction, LiDAR scanning, and satellite imaging accidentally triggered a discovery that rewrote everything we thought we knew about this place. What they found beneath the surface was not just older than expected, not just bigger than expected. It was something that should not exist at all. Something that forces you to ask very uncomfortable questions about who built this place, why they built it, and how much of it is still hidden. And here is what makes this story genuinely dangerous. Within weeks of the findings going public, the Peruvian government made a move that makes no rational sense, unless what is buried beneath Machu Picchu is worth far more hidden than understood. This is the discovery no one saw coming, and no one was prepared for what happened next. To understand what is buried beneath Machu Picchu, we have to go back 1 year earlier to a genetics lab at Yale University, where a bioarchaeologist named Dr. Lucy Salazar had just received results that made her call her colleague at 2 in the morning. Not because she was excited, because she did not know what she was looking at. For months, Salazar and geneticist Dr. Richard Berger had been leading an effort to extract and sequence the DNA of 34 individuals buried within the walls of Machu Picchu. These were not random bones found scattered in rubble. These were carefully placed burials positioned in deliberate locations throughout the citadel, interred over centuries with clear intention. The study was supposed to be straightforward. A genetic census. Something to confirm what most scholars already believed, that Machu Picchu was a royal estate for the Inca Emperor Pachacutec, a retreat in the clouds for the most powerful man in South America, a private sanctuary above the world. The data did not cooperate. The DNA profiles of those 34 individuals did not align with standard Inca highland populations. Not even close. The genetic diversity was staggering, so far outside expectations that Salazar and Berger had to check their methodology. People from completely different ethnic backgrounds, different regions, different linguistic groups, all interred together in one location. Some carried genetic markers from coastal populations, hundreds of miles to the west. Others traced to groups far to the north, from entirely different ecological and cultural worlds. Dr. Berger later described the findings as unlike anything they had anticipated. The picture forming on their screens looked nothing like a royal retreat. This was something else entirely. Something far more complex, far more deliberate, and far more consequential than anyone had imagined. And then Salazar found the 6 women. 6 female remains buried among the others carried DNA that traced not to the Andes Mountains, but to the Amazon rainforest. Lowland jungle people found at 2,440 meters altitude in the clouds, at a site supposedly reserved for Inca royalty. I need you to picture the distance here. The Amazon basin and Machu Picchu are separated by some of the most brutal, unforgiving geography on the planet. You start in dense, sweltering jungle at near sea level humidity, so thick you can taste it, insects, heat, the constant damp weight of the air pressing against you. Then you begin to climb. Through cloud forest first, where the trees drip with moisture and the trails dissolve into mudslides after rain. Then up through vertical mountain passes, where the trails narrow to the width of your shoulders, and the drop beside you disappears into mist. Freezing altitudes, where the air thins until your lungs burn with every step, where the temperature plummets 40 degrees in a single day. The terrain shifts from mud to ice to exposed rock face with no warning. Modern hikers equipped with satellite phones, Gore-Tex gear, and GPS still die on routes like these. And somehow, 500 years ago, these women made that journey, or were made to make it. One pair stopped Salazar cold, a mother and daughter, buried near each other. When the team analyzed the isotopes locked in their bones' chemical signatures that record where a person lived, what they ate, what water they drank, the chemistry told 2 completely different life stories. The mother's bones carried one dietary and geographic signature. The daughter's carried another. They had lived in different places, at different times of their lives, on different diets, breathing different air, drinking from different rivers. Two women, connected by blood, separated by entire geographic worlds, and then reunited in death at 2,440 meters in a citadel nobody was supposed to question. Salazar sat with those results for a long time before she wrote anything down. This was not random migration. This was not coincidence. This was orchestrated. These women were transported, deliberately moved hundreds of miles through some of the most punishing terrain on Earth by someone who had the authority to move people across an empire like pieces on a board. Someone who decided, for reasons we still do not fully understand, that these particular women needed to be here. The question that nobody in the Peruvian government wanted to touch was brutally simple. Why? Why bring Amazonian women to a mountain fortress in the sky? What role did they play? What were they doing at a site supposedly reserved for highland royalty? And what does their presence carefully buried, deliberately placed, tell us about what Machu Picchu actually was? These questions did not have comfortable answers. They still do not. But that was not even the strangest part. Because while Salazar and Berger were analyzing bones in New Haven, someone else was already scanning from the sky. And what they found made the DNA look like a footnote. In 2024, Ari Karamanica and a team of remote sensing specialists flew LiDAR-equipped drones over sections of Machu Picchu that no tourist has ever set foot on. LiDAR fires millions of laser pulses at the ground every second and builds three-dimensional maps of what lies beneath vegetation, soil, and even shallow rock. It strips away the jungle like peeling skin from a body. It sees through centuries of overgrowth. It sees what human eyes cannot see, what human feet have never reached, what centuries of assumption have kept invisible. The drone swept across densely forested slopes surrounding the famous terraces and temples areas that had been officially classified for decades as natural wilderness. Untouched jungle, framing a known archaeological site. Nothing to see here. Move along. What appeared on Karamanica's screen was 12 structures. 12 previously unknown buildings and platforms, hidden beneath centuries of jungle growth, structures that had never appeared on any map, any survey, any archaeological record in 500 years of continuous exploration. Some showed the unmistakable signatures of ceremonial platforms. Others appeared residential, possibly administrative. The specific function of each is still being debated. But that is not the point. The point is they were there. They had always been there, and nobody knew. Here is the detail that changes the temperature of this story. The areas where these structures were found are restricted zones. Tourists do not go there. Most researchers do not go there. These are sections of the site controlled by the Peruvian government, sealed off for decades, off limits without explanation, without public justification. Nobody has publicly explained why these zones were restricted in the first place. Nobody has explained why scanning them was never considered a priority in 5 centuries of archaeological work. Nobody has explained why it took commercial drone technology in 2024 to find buildings that had been sitting there since the 15th century. 12 buildings, hidden for 5 centuries, found in weeks, in areas nobody was officially allowed to look. Areas the Peruvian government had kept sealed while, as we would later learn, quietly reviving plans to flood this entire valley with 8 million tourists a year. And if 12 structures were hiding just outside the known boundaries, immediately adjacent to the famous citadel, the follow-up question writes itself. How many more are sitting in the surrounding valleys? How large was the original complex? Were we looking at a single citadel? Or at the visible center of something far, far larger, a network of sites and structures stretching across an entire mountain landscape that we have barely begun to map? Hold that question, because the next discovery made it worse. In 2025, a geologist named Dr. Rualdo Menegot at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil was analyzing satellite imagery when he noticed something in the geological data beneath Machu Picchu that made him rerun his models 3 times before he believed what he was seeing. 2 major fault lines, each stretching approximately 175 kilometers, crossed directly beneath the citadel. Not near it, not close to it, directly under it, forming a near-perfect X in the bedrock. The intersection point sits almost precisely where the main temple complex stands. Now, fault lines typically mean one thing to most people: instability, seismic risk, the possibility of collapse. You build on fault lines, and you accept the consequences. History is full of cities that did not. But when Mennegat and his team ran computer simulations over 1,000 earthquake scenarios across every conceivable magnitude and direction of seismic force, the results shattered every expectation they had formed. Every single simulation produced the same outcome. The intersection of those two fault lines is extraordinarily stable. The opposing tectonic forces at the crossing point essentially cancel each other out, creating a geological sweet spot where the ground barely moves, even during significant seismic events. The very forces that should make this location dangerous make it, instead, one of the safest points in the entire region. Let me say that differently, because this needs to land clearly. The Inca built their most sacred site on the single most earthquake-resistant point in the entire surrounding landscape. A point that required orbiting satellites, advanced geological modeling, and supercomputer simulations to identify in the 21st century. And they found it in the 15th century. Without instruments. Without written language, as we understand it. Without any technology we can identify or explain. Cusco itself has been devastated by earthquakes multiple times throughout recorded history. Entire colonial districts leveled. Churches collapsed. Thousands killed. The city has been rebuilt, repaired, and rebuilt again. Machu Picchu still stands. 5 centuries of seismic activity. Not a single significant structural failure from an earthquake, ever. Either the Inca got impossibly, miraculously, once in all of history lucky choosing this one perfect geological point out of thousands of possible mountain locations, all by accident, or they understood something about the ground beneath their feet that we are only now, with the full weight of modern science, beginning to catch up to. When Mennegat published his findings, the Peruvian government said nothing. No response, no acknowledgement, complete silence. The same silence they had given to the DNA findings, the same silence they would give to every discovery that followed. And that pattern, consistent, deliberate, unbroken silence, in the face of extraordinary evidence, is going to matter a great deal in a few minutes. Because the geological surprise was connected to something engineers had been quietly documenting for years. Something buried even deeper. When modern engineers began studying Machu Picchu's construction in serious detail, they made a discovery that still has not fully sunk in for most people. What tourists photograph the terraces, the temples, the iconic stone structures that appear on every postcard and travel brochure represents roughly 40% of the actual engineering at the site. Maybe less. 60% of Machu Picchu exists underground. Let that land for a moment. More than half of one of the most famous archaeological sites on the planet is invisible. Buried beneath your feet when you stand at that famous viewpoint and look out over the Andes, you are standing on top of a hidden city, and you do not know it. Nobody told you. The postcards never show it. When excavation teams dug 9 feet beneath the visible terraces, they found an elaborate subterranean infrastructure, drainage systems, foundation networks, retaining walls, water channels carved from stone, an entire hidden architecture of engineering beneath the one the whole world thinks it knows. The terraces tourists admire are not simply agricultural platforms. They are the visible tips of a massive, integrated system that manages water flow, prevents erosion, distributes weight, and stabilizes the mountain itself against the very earthquakes those underlying fault lines would otherwise produce. Strip away the postcard view and you find layer after layer of invisible genius, stacked underground, functioning perfectly, doing its job in total silence. The drainage network alone would be remarkable by modern civil engineering standards. Water entering at the highest point of the site is channeled through stone-lined conduits, redistributed across dozens of terraces at precisely calculated gradients, filtered through carefully graded layers of gravel and stone, and expelled at the base of the mountain in controlled streams. Zero pooling, zero erosion, zero structural failure. For 500 years, through monsoon seasons, through earthquakes, through centuries of complete abandonment after the Inca Empire collapsed, the system has functioned without a single repair. This invisible infrastructure was built without iron tools, without wheels, without mortar between the precisely fitted stones. And it still works. Right now, as you are reading this, ancient Inca drainage systems are managing rainfall on a Peruvian mountainside more efficiently than most modern cities manage their stormwater. Engineers who have studied the system say it rivals anything constructed in the last 100 years. Some say it surpasses it. But the precision did not stop underground. At the highest point of Machu Picchu stands a carved granite pillar called the Intihuatana. The name translates as the place where the sun is tied. For decades, archaeologists treated it as ceremonial decoration, a ritual object. Interesting, photogenic, something to explain briefly on a guided tour and move past. Symbolic, not functional. Then someone decided to actually measure it. Precisely. With GPS satellites, 3 degrees. The Intihuatana stone is aligned within 3 degrees of true north. Not magnetic north, which wanders and drifts over time as the Earth's magnetic field shifts. True geographic north, the actual rotational axis of the planet. This single carved stone functions as a solar calendar, marking solstices and equinoxes to within 15 minutes of accuracy, year after year, century after century, without adjustment, without recalibration, without maintenance of any kind. The level of astronomical precision encoded in this one piece of raw granite matches standards used today for modern satellite calibration. 500 years ago, at 2,440 meters, carved with hand tools from a mountain boulder by people who, according to the dominant academic narrative, had no telescopes, no precision instruments, and no advanced mathematical framework that we have been able to identify. So, hold all of it together at once. The earthquake-proof placement on an invisible geological X, the 60% of the site still buried underground. The 12 unknown structures found in government-restricted zones. The DNA evidence of a deliberately assembled multi-ethnic population drawn from across an entire empire. The astronomical alignment that rivals modern satellite technology. The drainage engineering that still outperforms contemporary cities. The question nobody wants to ask out loud is the obvious one. How much of Machu Picchu has actually been discovered? 10%? 20%? What else is buried beneath that mountain, in those restricted zones, in those surrounding valleys we have never properly scanned? If you are connecting the same dots I am, you already know this does not add up. January 2026. Peru's Ministry of Culture approves a master plan for Machu Picchu's protection, conservation guidelines, visitor management protocols, preservation goals extending to 2046. 20 years of careful, science-led stewardship. On paper, exactly what every researcher, every archaeologist, every scientist who had spent years warning about the site's fragility had been demanding for a decade. 3 weeks later, February 2026, Peru greenlights the Chinchero International Airport. 3 weeks. From a 20-year protection plan to a construction timeline measured in months. Hints of this had been building for years, even as LiDAR was mapping restricted zones, and Menegot was publishing geological findings that made Machu Picchu's significance orders of magnitude larger. Quietly, steadily, the Peruvian government had been reviving an airport project that had been dead for 15 years. The project had been frozen by corruption investigations tied to the Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht. Billions of dollars had vanished into bribery schemes spanning 12 countries. Presidents had fallen. Officials had gone to prison. The Chinchero Airport had been buried in that wreckage, along with the contracts and the money. In early 2026, it did not just come back. It was fast-tracked. Target operational date, late 2027, 18 months from approval to planes landing. Projected capacity, 8 million visitors per year. That is roughly 200% above current levels. Funneled through a valley already failing on basic infrastructure, water supply, waste management, road capacity, none of which currently scales to double its present load, let alone to triple it. And the runway itself is being built directly on top of 600-year-old Inca agricultural terraces at Chinchero. These are not ruins in the romantic, already collapsed sense of the word. These are functioning terraces, 6 centuries old and still working. The irrigation flows, the drainage performs, the structural engineering holds without a single repair in 600 years. The same engineering tradition, the same construction techniques, the same impossible precision that built the underground systems beneath Machu Picchu. They are going to pave over them with a runway. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. The capacity study, the official government report, that is supposed to determine whether the Sacred Valley can sustainably absorb 8 million visitors per year, is not due until September 2026. 7 months after the airport was approved. They approved the destination before the study that determines whether the destination can survive the traffic. The report will arrive in September. It will almost certainly confirm what every independent archaeological and environmental assessment has already concluded. The Sacred Valley cannot support that volume. The water systems, the roads, the waste infrastructure, the archaeological preservation protocols, the basic physical constraints of the terrain, absolutely none of it scales. And the airport will open anyway. The decision was made before the data existed. That is not an oversight. That is a choice. 8 million tourists per year generates revenue at every level of the economic chain. Airlines, hotels, transport companies, tour operators, food vendors, tax receipts. That money does not flow to archaeologists. It does not fund preservation. It flows through the same infrastructure networks, the same government-adjacent financial channels that have controlled Peruvian construction contracts for decades. Follow the money. It always tells you who benefits and who decides. The scientists have not been quiet about any of this. Dr. Salazar, researchers from Cambridge, teams from Japanese archaeological institutions. They have published warnings, given interviews, submitted formal objections. The foot traffic, vibration, moisture intrusion, and construction activity associated with mass tourism at this scale pose direct, measurable, irreversible threats to the underground infrastructure that has survived intact for 5 centuries. Peru's response? Silence. No rebuttals, no counter-arguments, no engagement with a single data point raised by a single research team, just silence and a construction timeline. One side has peer-reviewed research, DNA evidence, LiDAR mapping, geological modeling. 5 centuries of structural proof that the site is more fragile, more significant, and more incompletely understood than anyone realized. The other side has revenue projections and a runway blueprint. And the Chinchero terraces they are about to pave over once those are gone. The living laboratory for understanding how Machu Picchu's underground systems were originally designed and built is gone with them, permanently. No recovery, no reconstruction, gone. So, here is where we are. And I need you to hear this clearly. Scientists spent 5 years peeling back what Machu Picchu really is. Not a vacation palace for an emperor. Not a ceremonial retreat for royal picnics above the clouds. A deliberately engineered nerve center of an empire, geographically perfect, genetically diverse, built on an invisible geological X that required satellite technology to identify, 60% buried underground, aligned to the stars within 3 degrees, designed with plumbing that still works after 5 centuries, and foundations that shrug off earthquakes that have flattened modern cities, built with steel and poured concrete. And now, immediately after every scan revealed how impossibly complex it is, after every study proved how fragile its surrounding ecosystem is, after every piece of evidence pointed towards something far more significant and far less understood than a tourist destination, Peru is racing to open the floodgates. Not carefully, not gradually, not with the studied caution that 5 centuries of unbroken survival demands, in 18 months flat. The capacity report arrives in September 2026. The airport opens in late 2027. And the question that will not let go, the question I am going to say because nobody else seems willing to, is this. What if this is not about tourism at all? What if the scans revealed something that certain people do not want carefully, publicly, independently studied? What if what is underground, what is hiding in those restricted zones, what those 12 structures actually contain, what the full extent of that subterranean city actually looks like is more valuable controlled than understood? What if someone looked at all that data and saw not a heritage site requiring protection, but an asset requiring management? I am not saying conspiracy. I am saying the timeline makes no rational sense unless you factor in what these discoveries threaten. 15 years of nothing. Dead silence. Not a single serious systematic excavation. Not a single comprehensive scan. Then 5 years of revelations that proved the site is orders of magnitude more significant and more fragile than anyone had understood. And suddenly, urgently, an airport project that sat dead for a decade and a half has to be finished in 18 months. Right after scientists proved there is far more buried beneath that mountain than anyone realized. Right after the data showed, unambiguously, that we have barely scratched the surface of what is down there. Dr. Menegot published The Geological X. Silence from Lima. Caramanica's LiDAR found 12 structures in restricted zones. Silence. Salazar's DNA shattered the royal retreat theory and proved Machu Picchu was a deliberately assembled multi-ethnic hub of imperial power, populated by people transported from across an entire continent. Silence. And then, 3 weeks after signing a 20-year protection plan, the bulldozers got the green light. September 2026, the capacity report drops. Will it change anything? Will a government that approved an airport before commissioning the study that determines whether the airport should exist suddenly reverse course because a report confirms what everyone already knows? Or was this decision cemented years ago, in rooms where revenue projections speak louder than 5 centuries of proof? Machu Picchu, the impossible city, built on the impossible X, with more than half of its secrets still buried in the dark beneath a mountain that was never supposed to give them up, is running out of time. The countdown is on, and something tells me we have not seen the worst of it yet.